blow this up.
Look alive, Bomb Squad, because we are back for another installment of Let's Blow This Up. We are rolling strong with the co-host collective series here on season 3. And today I'm joined by my friends Marc, Ronick, and Xavier. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Thank you. Same.
It's funny, we've all been talking so much today as we sit down to record, and here we are actually capturing it in recorded fashion now. So that always makes me happy. So today we're going to tackle the subject of limiting beliefs, and there's a number of different ways that we can go with this because there are always going to be those struggles that you feel internally when you're launching a podcast that sometimes might even prevent you from getting started with your podcast because you put yourself in this box of, I don't do well with this, or I don't deserve to win at that. And all of a sudden it's like starting becomes the furthest thing from your mind. We want to eradicate that to the furthest degree today. And I'm glad I've got two great people here that talk with people about this all the time. I do as well. So let's roll with this, guys. Let's talk about the limiting beliefs that prevent podcasters from growing and how they can overcome them. And I'll open the floor to both of you. What are some of the biggest limiting beliefs that you've encountered in your time in the podcast space?
Anna, I'll let you go first.
Sure. So I think the limiting beliefs that I see all the time are things around podcast growth. Like, is my podcast growing enough, fast enough? Are these good download numbers? And also like the idea of like, how do you get sponsors? How soon is it to get how soon do you need to think about sponsors? And, if you want to be perceived as successful, what are the elements they need? So like, these are like the top 3 that I see most frequently. And I can delve into those in a little bit, but I feel like just like a bird's eye view of that. That's what it is, Marc.
Yeah. And you know what? I just have to say, Anna, you are like one of the few people that I can say genuinely uses the word delve, and it wasn't from AI.
I was just thinking that,
you've done that
word of the
before.
day.
Yeah, like I've heard you use it in sentences before, so I will never accuse you of writing something in AI if I see you use that word.
Yeah, it's because in the UK, I lived in the UK, and the UK folks, like British English, does use delve a lot. So yeah I was using it way before AI did it. I'll take that. But thank you. Yeah.
You were using delve before delve was cool.
That's right. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. I hear those kinds of limiting beliefs all the time. And there's also the factor, maybe this is more for those that are getting started, but I think that this applies as I'm thinking through some of my clients. This applies really at any stage. There are those thoughts of like, I'm not interesting enough, or I don't have a voice for podcasting, I don't have the tech skills, or my niche is too saturated. I can't get a big audience. I'm not going to be able to monetize because my audience isn't big enough. Those are the kinds of things that I often hear. And I mean, and I'm one of those people. I think one of my early limiting beliefs in podcasting specifically, and maybe it's why I didn't get into radio, was because I believed that I didn't have a radio voice. I didn't have that professional sounding voice. Right. And it absolutely held me back. And I think that thankfully, one of the people that I worked with through the years, he is a professional in the radio industry and does have that big, bassy, booming voice. And he told me one day, and it really shifted that limiting belief for me, that it's not the sound of your voice, it's how you use it. That qualifies as a radio voice. Yeah. And like I said, that to me was all I needed. It shifted my perspective on it, and I was able to let that go. And it's funny because nowadays when I sit and talk to people, they always say, oh, well, Marc, this is easy for you. You have that voice already. And I laugh in my head because, I mean, I still sometimes don't believe it. I just think I've figured out how to use it well so that it really sticks when people hear it.
I feel like the voice thing is one of the biggest hangups in the very beginning. I've talked to so many people, and it was funny. One scenario that comes to mind was I was sitting with a husband and wife, and I was talking to the wife about her doing a podcast, and she said, I've thought about going down that path at some point in my life, but I just hate my voice so much I could never do it. Yeah. And then I said, well, think about it this way. Is your message important enough that you could overcome how your voice sounds in your head? And she said, oh, of course. I said, okay, well, let's start there, because most people are not coming to your podcast just because of the sound of your voice. They're coming to hear your message. And this is all very basic boilerplate, what you would say to respond to that comment. And her husband came out of nowhere and says, I don't know what you're talking about. I love your voice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hang up, I think, sometimes, because we're with our voice all day, every day. And when we're thinking through things, it's usually in our own voice. We're sick of it. We're tired of hearing it. And therefore we think no one else is going to want to hear it either. And it couldn't be further from that.
Or it's just somebody who said, oh, I don't like the sound of your voice, or they, you know what I mean? Like, it could have just been the influence of hearing it from somebody else once and then making that giant assumption that means nobody's going to like it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's true. And you know, something that I did that completely changed how I perceived myself was I worked in radio and I've done TV and I've done the producing job. And for some reason, I cannot stand listening to myself. But if there's a video component, my squirrel brain would go, oh, yay, images. And so, like, that's actually how I got over myself. And when I decided to launch my own podcast, I was like, okay, I know that YouTube has potential, but then I know that I'm going to be like so annoyed at myself while I'm editing it audio only, because there's no other kind of sense to distract me. So the video component somehow, and it's not that I like seeing myself. I'm definitely not someone who's like, oh yeah, let's like film whatever, but it tricked my brain. So I think that for people who are thinking like, I have these hung up, is like, how can you hack your brain into believing that you can do this through a different, unexpected, because, you know, for most folks, they're like, oh, video, I couldn't possibly. And now actually sometimes it's the editing it on Descript, because I'm reading the words and then looking at the transitions and seeing if it's smooth or not. But like the focus is on the words. So there is a way to get over that mindset, that limiting belief is just putting some effort into actually figuring it out.
Yeah.
Like another thing. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say one thing that I didn't even mention. It is the idea of like, I don't have enough to talk about. Right? Like we hear that all the time. Like, I don't know what I would be talking about. I'm like, don't you have conversations, especially if you have a business? Like, don't you have conversations with the clients all the time? Mm-hmm. Gary V did say like, document, don't create. And is that I take that approach all the time, is like, okay, what happened today? What can I talk about and weave in my expertise or put that in my notes? But there's this idea that the podcast will run out of episodes because you have nothing else to say. I'm like, well, if you get the right angle, you will have endless episodes. So I'm pretty sure that's like one thing that both of you encounter as well with podcasters.
Oh, I mean, I sometimes encounter it myself. I'm doing a show every day, Monday through Friday, about podcasting. It can get challenging. Yep, what can you talk about, right? Mm-hmm. But you find a way, you find an angle. And to that point, Anna, I have lately oftentimes just been incorporating my own experiences into the show and opening that up for discussion. And in some of our best shows has been a result of that.
Yeah,
I'll give you mad props, Mark, for what you do on a daily basis, Monday through Friday, new topics. You know, sitting down to do season 2 or season 3 of Let's Blow This Up, plotting out 36 episode ideas was enough of a challenge. And here you are doing it every day for the entire year, nonstop. Yeah. That's something. I mean, that's really something to be proud of, because those conversations, having been a part of them, they're always fresh. And there's always a new spin on even topics that have been talked about before. Right.
And that's just it. It's finding, yes, I'm going to talk about some of the same stuff again and again and again. And it's really a matter of how can I make it fresh? What's a different angle I can approach? And sometimes it is more or less repeated information. And I have to be okay with that, because I am going to get new listeners, and some of the returning listeners. Sometimes, look, we've heard this before, right? It takes 7 times, I believe, for something to sink in for people. So maybe the message that I spoke about last time didn't sink in, but this time when I say it hit that person at just the right moment, and the light bulb went off for them.
I used the exact same phrase in back-to-back episodes on my solo series this year in the first couple episodes. And I caught myself when I edited going, oh shit, I already said that. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to roll with it because it's very applicable to both of these things. And that's the thing. You don't need to reinvent the wheel every single time. And this goes back to that limiting belief of not having enough to talk about. It's okay to talk about something repeatedly, put a new spin on it, or hell, just talk about the whole subject all over again. More than likely, there's been progress with whatever surrounds that subject. So new listeners and old listeners alike are going to be able to listen to that and get something from it. So don't be afraid to run. We'll just call it a rerun for lack of a better term. But really, there's so much importance in what you're saying that saying it twice isn't going to hurt anybody.
Yep. Agreed.
And you know, something that like comes to mind, a lot of times folks get that idea that basically like I have to come up with all the ideas. Whereas in your situation, Mark, like I'm sure you have ideas from the Facebook group, from folks who participate like all the time. And I think as a podcaster, you have to be open to taking suggestions from your listeners, because that's actually one of the tools that I use to gauge basically the connection, the pulse you get in the industry, right? Taking in an idea from somebody, if that person is thinking about it, someone else is. And so as a leader, you can tap into what your audience is already thinking, especially if it's like something that has just happened. There's, you know, timeless topics that can be talked again and again in January, in the middle of the year, and late in December. So it doesn't really matter. But there will be things that you're thinking like, okay, if it's in the news and my listeners are asking this, then it's definitely a signal for me to lean in and engage that feedback. And, you know, your community is super engaged, but I feel like even getting one message, if it doesn't make sense to use in like one specific season, but have it for next time, and name dropping people really helps. Maybe like a follow-up question that gives an idea to another episode. So, you know, I think it's also interesting to think about, how do you Mark, like go comb through ideas when you're like, this is good enough? Because sometimes like feedback can be great. Sometimes it's like, I don't want to talk about it, right?
Well, we've shared a couple, you know, where sometimes it's just my own experiences, and then you just shared. Sometimes it's what I deal with or what the questions I get are from clients, maybe my community. But sometimes, like today is a great example. Today, I wasn't even sure what I was going to do an hour before the show started. So where did I go? What did I do? Yeah, I went to my Facebook community first. Couldn't really find anything that struck me. So I went to other Facebook groups, and I looked at Buzzsprout's Facebook group. I looked at Podfest's Facebook group. What questions are people asking there? And honestly, what hits me, it's just that. It's whatever really hits me, like, oh, I could, you know, I like feel like I'm chomping at the bit to answer the person. That's the topic. That's what we're going to talk about on the show. And it works brilliantly every time.
That's incredibly smart too, because it's so topical. Obviously, if somebody's asking that in the moment, and especially if it's got a ton of engagement and there's lots of people offering their 2 cents, that's something that people care about. Yeah. Now here you are daily creating content for that. There's a lesson in that for everyone, regardless of the frequency of your show. If there's a topic that's being talked about in your communities, run with that.
Right, because it's very likely that's a topic you may have already talked about at some point, but it's like you're saying, it's still relevant. Somebody is asking it right now. So that means if you're going to talk about it, it's going to not only help that person, it'll probably help a bunch of other people that are listening too.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in regards to limiting beliefs, a big one that I know, Anna, you had talked about this. I can't remember if you brought this up when we were rolling or if we talked about this pre-recording, but we were talking about download numbers. And Mark, you, me, and Simona had a great conversation around the importance of download numbers and when it makes sense to lean into those numbers. But I think a lot of times that number can put a limiting belief in somebody's mind because they'll have expectations that are far too high, or they just don't know what to expect, but they think that whatever number they see isn't good enough. And therefore they start to say, wow, I'm not good at this. No one wants to listen. I was right. I didn't think anybody would want to hear this. And these numbers prove that. And that's something I think more than anything in podcasting, especially for the new podcasters that are getting started. And numbers reflect that. When we hear 90% of new podcasters don't get past 3, 4, or 5 episodes, I have to think download numbers are what plant that seed to tell somebody this isn't worth my time. I'm really not good. So what do we do to get somebody beyond that hump so they keep moving forward and ultimately hit that breakthrough, which there's no exact episode on when that could happen, but we know it's not 3 or 4. It's down the road a little bit more, but you got to get past that limiting belief of just not doing good enough in the beginning. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So there's a few factors I was listening to, and I was like, okay, what are like the 3 things that I need to start on? So I think that one, there's that lack of visibility, right? On YouTube, for instance, you can see how many plays that creator had, right? And so on podcasting, because you don't see what the average is, you think that the very popular podcasters are the norm, when like this is true for any type of content. Virality is the exception. And years ago, I remember seeing something like 90% of audiences subscribe to the biggest podcasts, you know, Call Her Daddy, Diary of a CEO, the Joe Rogan, blah, blah, blahs. And then only 10% of the overall audience, so we're talking about, you know, like hundreds of thousands of people, actually pick smaller shows. So when we're thinking about that, we go, oh, okay, like that's a smaller piece of the pie. But unlike radio, when you turn on the radio, you're like, whatever, I don't care what is being said. On podcasting, we know that's not true. So you know that the people choosing to tune in are the ones that already care. So there's already like a lot of personal investment in those downloads. And I normally say like my episodes, the average are anything from like 30 to 50 within the first like week and a half. And what are those 50 people doing? I think that we have to consider a few things. How are we promoting the podcast? First thing, right? Promoting a podcast, whether that's through a newsletter, social media, or offline marketing, is going to have an impact. I'm sorry, like if you're not talking about it, if you're keeping your podcast as the best kept secret, it's not going to grow. It's not going to grow. Right. And so choosing guests, if you're having an interview show, you're likely to have a bigger growth than if you're only doing solo episodes, because it's just you're relying on your own network to make it to grow. And so, but then when we're looking at the guests, are we selecting guests who actually actively promote the episode, or are they guests who are just like, I'm just using a platform, I don't really care about what happens, right? So all of those are factors that influence the performance of the podcast. And then the last one is, are you creating a bingeable experience? And that falls into two spaces. One, do you have a big catalog for people to listen through? Because the bigger the catalog, the more downloads you will have. That's like clear effect on your downloads. Yep. When you just have 10 episodes for people to binge, those are just 10. If you have 300, people who will find the podcast through SEO, through social media, through YouTube, through the different avenues, are just going to have a bigger catalog to just consume. So again, not everyone will binge, but the ones that will, they have more episodes to go through. So when we're thinking about how we are creating that bingeable experience, we have to consider, how can we tap, just like you did, Jason, on, hey, the previous episode we did about downloads, so the listeners are primed, hey, I actually can go and listen. Right. And this is so simple and can be done in pre-production. So when people think, oh, my downloads, they're not growing, we have to ask ourselves, what are we actively and passively doing to grow those episodes, and not just, oh, this isn't like big, or this isn't, relevant. Somebody, I think it was Lloyd George, mentioned on my episode, he's like, oh, I had a friend who had like 30 downloads, and someone in Oprah's team found his podcast and listened, and that was enough for that person to then get a lot of opportunities. So it's about who's listening, not so much how many downloads. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yes. So I will like wrap this up and say that's my thoughts on it. Podcasters, we need to talk more about our actual downloads, and what does that mean? Sharing screenshots, talking about it. That will like normalize the fact that not everyone has 300 downloads, but also what are we doing to grow that podcast?
Yeah, I have there's a member of my community, a listener of my show, who posted in my Facebook group just recently. I happen to know she doesn't get huge numbers. She gets average numbers of what most independent podcasters may get. And she was contacted early last week by a radio station who wants to pick up her show and play it on Sunday morning.
Awesome. There you go.
Right. And then there was a perfect example of, don't worry about how many, just worry about who might be listening, and put out your best product you can.
And that's something that goes back to, it was the comment I made when we did that downloads episode, is let the numbers fall into place and just focus on the content you're making. Because the more focused you get on your subject matter, the more intelligent you're going to get in the way you present that, the better the conversations are going to be with your guests. And like both of you have exemplified here, you never know who's listening to that content and what it could lead to. And if you stop because you're letting the limiting belief in your mind say this isn't working, nothing like that will ever happen. Especially, I mean, you'd have to think that that opportunity came up because she was consistently putting new content out, not because she put out a few episodes and walked away. Because if that radio station would have found that content and there was only a few episodes and she hasn't produced anything in a few years, they're going to be like, well, this is a dead show. There's no point in trying to have this in place.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to think about all of the goals that you have in mind for what you want your show to accomplish and let that guide you versus getting consumed by numbers and consumed by thoughts or even negative comments that you might receive. I love the negative comments because I take it as constructive criticism, even if it's just some troll trying to be a dick. I can look at that and say, all right, is there anything that I could pull from this that could be applicable to what I'm doing? And maybe some improvements could come from that.
Right. Like, how did I trigger that person? Because clearly that's why they've trolled you.
They took the time.
Something that triggered them. So it's worth looking into. And I think that's leading into perspectives, right? It's really putting perspective to it. It's like, why are you so focused on download numbers if we're using that as the example? What is it about that that's making you say you need more? You got to stop and ask yourself, really, what is that the most important number to me? If it is, okay, I'm not going to argue with you. I want to hear why it is. But, really, it's like what we talked about in that last episode is about, retention rate. Is that maybe the bigger focus? Instead of just how many people are pressing that play button, instead, maybe you want to focus on how many people are actually listening through to my whole episode. Yeah, it's a perspective shift.
I think, and there's a combination of those. Sorry, Jason.
Oh, you're fine.
The element of one, the fact that you're doing it, and second, the quality of the content, right? And I find that I had, even before I had a podcast, just because I was visible, and I think this is the key. If you have a podcast, you have to be visible. I had partnerships with Captivate, Riverside, Osha, and my downloads, again, are not even 1,000 overall per month because I was taking an active role. And this is where the limiting beliefs come back again, right? We have to find ourselves worthy of opportunities. Everything else is an excuse. Oh, I don't have enough downloads. Oh, I don't have enough of a big platform. Oh, I don't have a good camera. Oh, I don't have a radio voice. Like, literally insert whatever excuse it is. And that's the reason why you're not getting to your goals. And I'm not like do it and, get your reps in. Like, it doesn't need to be like aggressive. It can be baby steps and going, okay, what's the worst that can happen if I was to send an email? If sponsorships are something that is important to you or collaborations, start building relationships. I mean, people will go, okay, you have a platform. That's all they care about. That you have people who are engaged. You have a skill to give. And people forget that numbers are not the ultimate. They put it as the outcome when its reality is just one piece of the puzzle, right? So all of the things you can achieve them with 2 downloads, with 200, with 2,000. It just depends on what is it that is your ultimate goal. Because for some people, you can have a podcast and that podcast has 10 episodes, and those 10 episodes that maybe don't have a lot of downloads, but builds your confidence to become a speaker, or build your confidence to build your network and then get to the decision makers. To Marc's point, what is your goal? What is your goal? What is it that you want? And asking yourself, do the downloads actually play a role in that? Yeah. Probably not.
And I look at those numbers as relative to your personal situation, because you say, I didn't even get 1,000 downloads per episode on that. To many of the bigger podcasters, they may look at that as 1,000. I get that in the first hour. But to somebody brand new, 1,000 downloads could be the biggest game changer in the world if that's what they're focused on.
Or the niche. The niche may not allow for 1,000 people within that interest to actually subscribe. So physically impossible.
No, I think if we're going to label this as one of the biggest limiting beliefs that people have, I think the biggest way to say it can be something that's important in your overall practices, but don't get consumed by it, is to just say, focus on your content, focus on your audience, focus on the relationships. And most importantly, all three of us have said this, focus on your goals. If you haven't set goals for what you want your podcast to achieve, you need to go backwards and do that. If you're at the beginning stage, make sure that's priority one. What am I trying to accomplish here? What do I want to achieve? Because if you've got clear goals and clear expectations of what's going to happen, the numbers will be irrelevant. They'll happen, but it'll be a byproduct. You won't lay awake at night wondering why only 100 people listened to this week's episode versus 200. And I only say that because I know these were thoughts I struggled with in my early days of podcasting. Why aren't more people showing up? I'm older and wiser and grayer now, so I understand this takes time to build, but it can throw somebody off so bad that they walk away before they really get to take a big bite out of the fruit that could change their life. And I mean it in that big of terms.
Yeah, and I'm going to go here for a second because I think it's also not healthy to have that mindset of I don't have enough downloads. Again, just using that as an example, right? That's a scarcity mindset. And I know that this kind of conversation sometimes scares people off because, I don't, great. I just have a positive attitude and everything's going to turn around, right? Yes and no. Right. So here's the thing is that our brains process millions of bits of information per second, right? Yet consciously, this is something that I've learned through some of my studies and personal growth. Consciously, we can focus only on somewhere around 126 bits of that information at a time. So that means that what we focus on literally shapes our reality. And I'm going to give you an example to try to put the pieces together for you. Have you ever had an instance, you maybe not this specific, but something like this, where a friend gives you a call, sends you a picture on a text or something and says, look at this brand new baby, this brand new puppy that I just got. It's a black and white Bernedoodle. Okay. They tell you all about it. They tell you about the coloring, the breed, they're so excited about it. Then the next thing you know, for the next day, the next week, all you're seeing are freaking Bernedoodles everywhere you go, right? Like you hadn't seen Bernedoodles until all of a sudden now, and that's your brain focusing on information that it's received and that's fresh and in the forefront. Yeah. And so if you're only thinking about not getting enough downloads, all you're going to be seeing are examples and instances of not enough downloads. So you want to try to rethink that and focus on how can I get more downloads? Maybe that's one way, but still that's still a scarcity mindset. So you gotta focus on the positive, the growth mindset. If you want to start seeing changes, is that the only thing you do? No, you also want to take action. You want to do things to move toward that. But it all does start first with that mindset of get out of that scarcity and get into that growth.
That inner algorithm can be a real bitch. And you have to put it in place. And Mark, that's a tremendous point. Putting focus on the right things is going to help you attain and achieve the right things. Yeah, man, I this is one of those ones that I wish we could go over our time limit, but in sticking with our theme of 30-minute deep dives in this series, I want to end with the biggest limiting belief that all of us have overcome. And Anna, we'll start with you.
Okay, that's an easy one. To me, the biggest limiting belief is that I was gonna struggle to build a brand because English is not my first language. And I'm hugely afraid. And this happens less frequently, but it's that I'm gonna forget an English word and I'm going to get blocked and I can't go around it. And podcasting for every single week for about 80 weeks did help me get over that. To me, that was like the limiting belief that doing the thing helped me prove to my monkey brain, yes, you can do this.
Excellent. How about you, Mark?
Man, I'm still working on getting rid of some of these limiting beliefs. And I think probably... Yeah, and I think probably the one that I struggle with the most is worthiness. I don't know that I don't think that I'm worthy right? And I think that that comes from being a kid and having ADHD all my life and not knowing that I had it officially until I was an adult. And so where I struggled, where I saw others not struggling, it made me feel like I'm not smart enough, I'm not worthy enough, I can't do these things, right? So that's years and years of programming in my brain of just thinking I wasn't as good or good enough. And once I've come to grips with, okay, it's an actual thing, it's ADHD, and it's just a matter of learning how to harness it, learning how to work with it. And I've gotten better at it, but it's still a struggle. It's still something I face, and that pours into other areas like comparison traps, right? Like I am one of those people that do still often compare others to me or vice versa, and I continue to work on that because it's a challenge. It really is.
Yeah. You stole mine, kind of. It's that. No, that's okay. It's okay to share things like this. I think that's the biggest thing for me too, is those comparison traps of, even as I've gotten to a point now in my life where I've realized that as I pay less attention to what other people are saying about me, it makes me function a lot more freely.
Yeah.
I have more confidence in my message and delivering it because I know the right people are going to find it. And if some people hear it and don't like it, that's okay. It's not the end of the world, and that's just how this works. But there's still those times where I feel like I will see somebody else saying the same thing as me or something very adjacent, and they've got thousands of people engaging with their content. Why haven't I got there yet? And I have to quickly snap myself out of it and say, that's not why you're doing this.
Yeah.
You're going to find your people. Your message is going to resonate. It already is, maybe just not on the bigger scale yet. And once you get comfortable with that, you can start to make peace with smaller numbers or better. I mean, just having better conversations, which to me, that should be the most important thing, right? If you're having great conversations and having fun doing it, well, isn't that what makes this worth it? But I get it. Sometimes we see those other numbers and we see those other people having success, and it can throw us off. And I know that's something that I wouldn't say daily anymore, but there's still times where I'll catch myself in a scroll hole and I'll see all this BS and say, no, it's happening. And I have to turn off the Instagram app and go do something else, read a book or take a walk or something to get my mind back to where it needs to be. So I think the overall lesson we can give to everyone in the Bomb Squad taking this in today is that you're going to face these limiting beliefs, but focusing on positives, and even in the most negative of those beliefs, look for something positive that's going to make you think about it differently. And things will fall into place the more you emphasize and accentuate those positives.
Love
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
Mark, Anna, you guys, as always, contributing so much value to this series this season. I can't thank you enough for being here and sharing some of your beliefs and some ways to help everyone overcome them. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
You bet. And hopefully we'll see you on another episode as this season rolls on. Bomb Squad, if you haven't done so already, jump back in the archives, take in some of the other episodes where Marc is featured, where Anna is featured, and we've got some great live streams and solo content from yours truly. Season 3 has been great so far. Looking forward to winding it down soon, but it's going to continue to roll forward because I have a feeling we'll all be back in Season 4 making some magic happen. Let's not jump too far ahead. Like, I'm scared. Yeah, we're not even done with Season 3, and Jason's talking about Season 4. Guys, thanks again for being here. It's been great. And Bomb Squad will catch you on the next episode of Let's Blow This Up. Until then, stay explosive.